So this morning, we're going to be talking about being informed, and that equals practical knowledge. So we're going to navigate through the special education process so that everyone has a better idea, a more in-depth idea of what that process looks like when you're going through it in either, it could be anytime during the school phase from kindergarten to graduation. And my name is Anna Zervis. I'm the Regional Parent Navigator for Stone Soup Group located in Fairbanks. I'm also the Program Coordinator for the MAP Mentor Parent Group. And Terry, my co-teacher, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Terry Manning, and I'm the Professional Development Coordinator for the Fairbanks School District. And part of my job is working with parents, working with teachers and administrators, and supporting school teams through the processes. And the best part of my job is being able to support teams at the school, especially with new teachers who have joined our district. We are good to go. So we really liked this. Every child is gifted. They just unwrap their packages at different times. So that really is what we believe, and that everybody, especially each child, is unique, and everybody deserves an education no matter what their level of functioning is, and it should be built on their strengths and supporting them with their challenges and helping them be as independent as possible and be able to access their education in every way possible. So we want to make sure that we support families and schools and students, and in realizing that we should have high expectations for our children, but they should be attainable. It should be based on each of the children's specific strengths and challenges, and success looks different for all of us, and especially for kiddos at school. So we want to make sure that we continue with the appropriate supports and expectations. So we want to make sure that you understand the lingo. I don't know how many of you have been in an IEP meeting, but we are very guilty at times of using acronyms for when we're talking to each other across the table. So we wanted to make sure that you had some of the acronyms that would be used. So IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, IEP, Individual Education Program, FAPE, free appropriate public education, which all children are entitled to. You'll hear, we want you to come for an Easter meeting. So that's the evaluation summary and eligibility report that is done as an initial, where students who are just being evaluated to see if they meet the criteria for having a disability under IDEA. It could be an additional, and after that meeting, there could be concern about another area. So we do an additional evaluation, or every 3 years you do the reevaluation. Then we're looking at MDR, Manifestation Determination Report, and that's when we have meetings for students who have had some behavioral infraction and they're looking at some type of discipline. We need to see whether or not it is connected with their disability or not. And you'll hear PLAF, Present Level of Academic Achievement and Functional Performance. We've had PLAF, PLOP, PLAP. So you'll hear different names for this area, and it's really, where is the student functioning right now? How are they able to work on the goals? How have they been doing on those goals? And then what goals, or what do they need to continue working on to be successful? Least restrictive environment. Sometimes when somebody says LRE or least restrictive environment, they may mean the general ed classroom, but that looks different for every student. We would love every student to be in the general ed classroom, but the least restrictive environment is very individual. Some students will not, that won't be their least restrictive environment. When we're looking at written notice, you should get written notice. And what this does is lets you know what the district is proposing or rejecting. So after every IEP, you should receive a written notice saying what happened at the meeting and how we're moving forward. Functional behavioral assessment, or FBA, and a lot of times you'll hear FBA, BIP together. So looking at what is the function of a child's behavior when it's interfering with their education, and then what is the behavior intervention plan put into place to support that child. SST, student support team, it can be different in different districts, but in the Fairbanks district, this is, we call ours an SST. And in some places it's a student assistant team. And if that's where teachers or parents can say, I have a concern about my child, and there's a team process at looking at interventions. An extended school year, you'll hear ESY, and sometimes that'll be interchanged with summer school. And that's actually not summer school. It often happens during the summer, but it's a service provided to students who need more continuous support to be able to move forward with their goals and objectives. And then we're looking at the 504 plan, which is an accommodation plan for students who may have disabilities, but do not qualify for IDEA. So when you hear this information, it's like, sometimes it's like a whole different language. So now we're going to move on to the school district responsibility. So as a school district, we are required by IDEA to have, we're supposed to have child find opportunities available. So for infants, for those who are not of school age, we're looking at early intervention programs. So they will look from 0 to birth for children who may have disabilities. But once you kids hit the preschool age level, or early learners, ages 3 to 5, then the school districts have child finds. And usually in the smaller villages, you'll see flyers posted, or it'll be on the radio or on the CB. You have to advertise these. In larger districts, they're more continuous. And we do one every 4 to 6 weeks here in Fairbanks. And that is to a screening to see if there is potential disability. And so we want to catch kids early. But once kids are in school age, we still have a child find obligation. And so many times that comes through the student support team process, the intervention process. We like to have students go through an intervention process to see if there are things that can be remedied. So we want before an evaluation, because we want to see what the child can really do. But we definitely are responsible for all students, making sure that we find out whether or not there's a possible disability. So that means even though private schools are not required to have special education programs, we are required to provide support to a private school if they think a child may have a disability. And we're also looking at charter schools, home schools, residential facilities, juvenile centers. So anybody who is within our region in our district, then we are responsible for supporting referrals and finding out whether or not a student does have a disability.
So now we're going to look at an overview of the process. So during the IEP process, there are several different parts and pieces, of course. Starting at the top,
Anna, we can't see that graphic.
Oh, okay. Well, that's good to know.
I know. We did, and it doesn't matter how many times you practice, it just happens to all of us.
Okay.
Perfect.
So we start with the child find, which is the recognition. So whether it's in the school, in early education, like pre-K, or even from birth, if it's recognized at birth, there is that obligation to find those kiddos and start helping them from that point. And once we find them, then student is given what's called a pre-referral. And this is when they're provided interventions developed by the parents and the team, the school-based team, to see if there are interventions that can help the kiddo. So if they're struggling in reading, okay, let's say that we've discovered that this kiddo is a year behind in reading. If there's intervention, like a reading pullout, or something that can help, and we do get that kiddo to the grade level, then the intervention was successful and the process stops. Let's say they're much further behind. The interventions are not successful, and at that point, they move to the referral stage. And once we get into referral, the student is then officially referred for evaluation by the special education department. And they will do a whole battery of evaluations with the consent of the parents. That's that written notice that's very important. And they will be evaluated with a variety of assessment tools and strategies. The school psych will come in, the OT will come in, the SLP might come in. It just depends on what those kiddos' needs are. And so they will evaluate them on a whole battery of tests depending on what the needs are. And then we will get into where we come in with that ESER. We have that eligibility determination. So the team sits down and determines if the kiddo is eligible for special education based on the evaluations that they did. If the student does have a disability that negatively impacts their educational performance and the child needs that special education service in order to benefit from education, this is when the IEP process will continue. So if there's no disability that's noted in the evaluations, then special education may not be required, and the process stops for an IEP. But it could be that they need a 504, and so they can branch off at this point into a 504, which is just accommodations to make learning the general curriculum easier for them, so that they can still be at the same level, and they just need a little bit of accommodation to do that. So maybe modified number of numbers in a math assignment, something like that. If they
Anna, can we also bring up that a 504 meeting would not happen at that point in time? It's a whole separate process that there would be a separate meeting. There's a separate set of criteria for 504s.
Yeah, that's when it branches off into that track. If there is a determination that there is a disability that impacts the educational performance and eligibility is determined for special education, then they would move forward to the IEP process. And this is when we bring together everyone. So we have special education teachers, we have administration, we have general education teachers, we have the parents, we might have some supportive services like OT or PT or speech come in, and they all sit down and go through and figure out what would be the best supports and interventions for the kiddo in the least restrictive environment for that kiddo. And like Terry said before, least restrictive environment is different for every kid. You may have a kiddo who the least restrictive environment is being in the general education classroom and just having pullouts throughout the day. You may have a kiddo that can't be in the general education classroom for one reason or another. So their least restrictive environment would be maybe one of the special education rooms. So least restrictive environment is individual to each child. And then we have FAPE. We have the implementation of the interventions and the special education services. Now, each year, the IEP team then does a reevaluation. They meet to determine whether or not the implementation of the current IEP happened, and if the student was able to meet their goals, and to develop the next annual IEP. They also do have a 3-year mark where they actually do new evaluations and assessments of the child as well. So just not to get that confused. So we have recognition. Sometimes families are the first ones that will come to the school or the early intervention or an agency to get a referral. Sometimes there's providers like daycare providers, family members like grandparents or aunts and uncles. Sometimes teachers will actually go to the family and say, I think your kiddo needs an evaluation. And then we have doctors as well. And it was my son's pediatrician who was the one I had suspected, but I didn't know for sure because it was so early. But it was my pediatrician who actually was the one that referred us for an evaluation. So it could be, you could get, recognition from a lot of different people in your life or agencies. And families can request an evaluation. And one of the important things we always tell families to do everything in writing and save that copy.
Yes, and going back, Anna, to that about, excuse me, about families requesting an evaluation, you could probably also expect that there will be somebody who will be talking to you, asking what your concerns are, so that they understand in what direction to go. I know I've worked with families before who requested an evaluation, and it turns out that they really weren't looking for a complete evaluation. There was something else they were looking for. So having that conversation is really important so that everybody's on the same page and understands what the concerns are. So looking at the pre-referral process, this sometimes hits people the wrong way, but our goal really is to keep kids out of special education if they don't need it. So we want to make sure that we are providing interventions within the school setting to help students access their education, whether they have a disability or not. So we start with these specific interventions. It could be social, it could be emotional, behavioral, could be physical, or based on academics. So going to the SST team, bringing what the teacher is doing and say, there's a challenge that this student is facing, and I need more support in helping figure out what's going on. So, but what we're asking teachers to look at is to look at the classroom routine. Are there set routines in the classroom for those students who need more structure? The structure of the class itself, is it set up in a way that students understand what the expectations are, and they know what's happening and then what's next, providing that differentiated instruction and accommodations to meet all learners. And in our district, we use personalized learning. So being able to differentiate is just part of what we do. And then looking at the intervention programs, and are we using those with fidelity, and are they scientifically research-based? So looking at this, looking at these areas will help determine whether or not a student has good access to education before being put through an evaluation. So when we're looking at the referral, so let's say they've gone through and pre-referral interventions has been tried. We've gone through the SST meeting and tried specific interventions, and those interventions have been implemented, but there's still a concern, and we suspect that there may be a possible disability. So that is what is triggering the referral for an evaluation, is that we want to make sure that we suspect that there's a disability. There's usually a time period with interventions, but also know that there may be extenuating circumstances that could change the timeline, and that there may be an immediate need for an evaluation, and then that would be put into place. So when a referral happens, that starts the process of getting requests from the parents and getting informed consent. So if your child is suspected of having this disability, but you decide that no, you don't want your child to be evaluated, the school cannot evaluate. And informed consent is knowing exactly what areas that the child is going to be assessed in. So if there's a suspicion of a learning disability, you can expect that there's at least going to be a request for a cognitive and then academic areas, and it can be broken up into reading, writing, and math. There may be testing for all three, or sometimes just one or two. So once that happens, and you've signed that, then there's a 90 calendar days in Alaska for the evaluation to be completed, and then determination met of whether or not they meet a criteria for disability, and then getting the IEP written and implemented. So it's a long process. And the bottom line is that as parents, or those supporting parents, that if there are questions, to make sure that you ask those questions and find out what's going on, what's happening, and what the plan is.
Children who have physical disabilities, developmental delays, or certain diagnoses, such as Down syndrome, are often identified early by a medical provider. These students may have a wide range of academic difficulties depending on the severity of the delay, and some may have no difficulties at all. Fortunately, because they are often diagnosed before entering public school, most children with physical disabilities or developmental delays enter school with special education structures in place. For other children, concerns about learning, behavior, or development may not appear until the child is in school. Parents are often the first to notice something concerning and can ask the public school to evaluate their child. The request should be made in writing and given to the principal of your child's school. Describe your concerns with the child's educational performance and request an evaluation under IDEA. Be sure to keep a copy of the letter and any attachments for your files. You should receive a written response, either an evaluation plan that requires your consent or a denial of your request, giving the reasons why. In both cases, you'll be provided a copy of your legal rights and responsibilities. The school must ask for your permission and receive your written consent before it may evaluate your child. Once you provide that consent, the evaluation must be conducted within 60 calendar days. The school itself may raise concerns about how a child is learning, behaving, and developing, based on a teacher's recommendation, observations, or results from tests given to all children. A school may recommend that a child receive further screening or assessment to determine if they have a disability and need special education and related services. The school must ask parents for permission and receive written consent before the evaluation is conducted. Once consent is received, the evaluation must be conducted within 60 calendar days. The first time a child is evaluated for special education is called an initial evaluation. You may also hear the term assessment to describe an evaluation. For an initial evaluation, it's important to examine all areas of a child's functioning. A team of public school professionals conduct the evaluation using various assessments, information provided by the parent, review of school records, and an observation in the classroom. Each member of the team has special knowledge and training in the area that's being assessed. The team works together to look at all of the child's skills. Areas include health, vision and hearing, social and emotional development, learning potential, academic performance such as reading comprehension, spelling, and arithmetic, communication skills, and motor skills. Assessments are diagnostic tools. They do not contain answers or solutions. Assessments are not able to predict your child's future performance nor their ability. The school will create an evaluation report that details all the information gathered, and each team member will give their results. Usually, the reports will include a statement about why your child was referred for evaluation, background information about your child's social and academic history, a list of the tests performed and the records reviewed, a summary of test results or scores, and an explanation about what the test results mean. Most reports have a summary or conclusion section. It usually consists of a few paragraphs at the end that sum up what was learned and what it all means. An evaluation report can be a lot of information to wade through. It may help to flip to the end and read the summary first. A reevaluation occurs at least once every 3 years and typically begins with a review of existing evaluation data, which may come from the child's classroom work, their performance on state or district assessments, or information provided by the parents. The purpose of this review is to decide if the existing data is sufficient to establish eligibility and determine educational needs, or if a reevaluation is needed. If the parent and the school agree the information is sufficient, the public school isn't required to complete assessments. If additional information is needed, the group identifies what data is needed. A reevaluation may also be conducted anytime the school or the parent believes the needs of the student should be reevaluated. Just like with the initial evaluation, the school must have the parent's written consent. If your child is determined to be eligible for special education, the next step is to draft an individualized education program known as an IEP. The Individuals with Disabilities Education Act gives the school district 30 days from the documentation of the disability to complete an IEP. Parents must give permission for placement as part of the initial IEP.
One of the things that we like to remind everyone is that before an evaluation can begin, written consent by the parent is very important to have in place so that everyone is on the same page. And it starts that clock when that written consent is turned in.
And then in the video, it was talking about that there was a more detailed report in our district, and in most districts that I've worked in Alaska, is we have our eligibility report, and that summarizes everything. And then you can expect a more thorough report from the school psychologist that they did the testing for academics. They would do academics and cognitive. They would have that information. Also, usually there's social, emotional, and behavioral information. If a school speech language pathologist has done it, there's usually a separate report from them that's more detailed. There's one for occupational therapy, and there's more detail there also. So the Easter is not our detailed report, that's our summary. And then you get, those are attachments. So looking at eligibility determination. So the team is going to come together. So whoever provided the assessment, so if it was a school psychologist, speech therapist, occupational therapist, physical therapist, they will come, or somebody who can interpret the results will be there. So you should expect that there would be a parent, a gen ed teacher, a special ed teacher, the specialist, the psychologist possibly, but not required if somebody else can give that information. So you're going to have this team who is going to go through the assessments that the evaluation was made of, and then they're going to, as a team, you're going to determine whether or not the student meets the criteria for having a disability under IDEA. So what can be challenging is a student can have a disability or challenges, but not meet the criteria under IDEA to get supports in the school. So once that's determined that the disability adversely affects their education and they meet the criteria, and then looking at whether or not they need specially designed instruction, then the team makes those determinations. If as a parent, you do not agree with a piece or all of the evaluation, you can request an IEE, which is an independent educational evaluation, and that's conducted by somebody outside of the school district, and the district pays for it. And you would request from the special education director's office in any district that you're in that you would like an IEE, and then there are they will give you a list of potential people to talk to in regards to the evaluation.
A lot of people, when they think of IEPs and 504s, they think of special education. But 504s are actually not actually a special education law. they are actually, they're covered under a civil rights law, the Rehabilitation Act, and it applies to any student with a qualifying disability. And it follows a much more informal process. It could not, the parents may not even need to be involved. Schools could just see that there's an issue and accommodate for it. Schools do not receive federal funding for services to qualifying students who have a 504 plan. Both plans do cover those accommodations and modifications to the school environment and classroom materials that may be needed. So like adaptive technology, like voice to text or pencil grips or any other related services. The IEP is covered under an education law, the IDEA, and it applies only to students who qualify for those special education services after their eligibility is determined in the core curriculum area. They are governed by strict procedures and timelines, and the parent involvement for this one is mandated. So getting those written consents, making sure the parents are at meetings, and parents can request meetings at any time. Schools do receive additional funding from the federal government for students receiving special education services.
So Anna, I'd like to make another point here too, is that even though parents, after the initial consent for evaluation, and if they qualify consent for services, school districts are required to invite the parents and give them the opportunity to participate. But if we cannot contact parents and we've gone through the process of trying to contact them, then we're required to hold a meeting. And what we do is then we send the information home, and then after the parents have read it, then if they have questions or concerns, they can request the IEP meeting. So we are obligated under law to hold that IEP meeting, but we're also obligated to make sure that we've tried to contact the parent to be a part of it. Anna, there's a question, what types of related services are there under 504?
So usually it's accommodations. So it could be anything from voice to text. It could be working on a computer or typewriter instead of writing. It could be a ramp for a school that doesn't have one because someone needs one for a wheelchair. It could be, that the kiddo needs to take a time out to go take medication at the same time every day. The modifications or accommodations for 504 plans are very diverse based on what the kiddo needs.
Okay, so now we've assumed that the student has met the criteria and has qualified for special education services because they met the criteria of having a disability, and they also need specially designed instruction. So the IEP is also written by a team, which includes the LEA. So that's typically the principal or assistant principal, the special education teacher, a general education teacher, and it says in the law not less than one, and we've never figured out how you can have less than one gen ed teacher there. So that's the core team, is the parent, the administrator, the general ed, and the special ed teacher. There may also be, depending on what the student is qualified for, you can have a speech pathologist, the related services personnel who would also be at that meeting. They are not required, but most often they are in attendance. So again, we talked about the PLAF before, the present levels, and it's about where is the student functioning right now, not necessarily where they tested when they were evaluated, but in the classroom. We look at the annual goals and the short-term goals. So in our district, we talk about the flow. From the ESER, then you write the needs. Then moving into the IEP in the present levels, you're talking about what those needs are and only those needs. So you're not, if a student did not qualify for needing behavior support, then that would not go in the present levels, even if there was concern, there were some behavioral things going on. Then that's going to flow into the annual goals, which then will also flow into services. So you want to make sure that when you're at a meeting that all of the needs that your child have documented on the ESER are being looked at in the IEP. And then the accommodations should be reflective of the child's needs. And you want to make sure that there's just not a laundry list of accommodations, but those that are actually going to support your child in their education. And because that also reflects into accommodations for testing. So if a student is being tested, let's say that you have small group instruction as one of the accommodations. Well, if they're not used to moving from one place to another for anything that they're doing in the classroom, then it could actually be detrimental when they're doing their tests. So let's say a statewide test. Let me explain this better. So if there's a statewide test and we're saying that student needs to be in a separate setting to take the test. If in their classroom program, they have not been going to a different place to take tests or do activities, that could throw them for a loop. If you say, oh, now you need to go to a different place. So any accommodations for testing need to be part of their classroom program accommodations also. You want the goals to be our SMART goals, make sure they're measurable and that we are able to see whether or not they are making progress. Any related services, we talked about occupational therapy, physical therapy, speech and language. Also, transportation may be a related service for children. Not all students receiving special education receive transportation. That's only on there if they require that to be able to access school. Some students are not able to ride a big bus on their own, and there's too much going on. They don't have the skills yet to be able to do it. Then they receive special education transportation. And then you're going to look at placement. And that's where you're looking about the least restrictive environment. So the general ed classroom is the least restrictive environment on the continuum of placements. But it may be that a student is also being pulled out into a resource room, or a student may have their main room being in a self-contained classroom where there's a separate teacher, but then they access either the resource room or the general ed classroom. Then we look at separate schools, which a separate day school in our district, it's the YES program. And that's for students who have severe behaviors. And when they're able to, then they come back into the school, a typical school. And then we're looking at residential facilities, and residential facilities are one of the most restrictive situations. So there are very few kiddos who are accessing that placement. And then you'll also be asked about, or will at some point be talking about diploma and non-diploma track, whether or not we have some students who are not looking at, especially when there was a test, we weren't looking at them them being able to pass the test. We were looking more at skills. So that would have been a non-diploma track. And then the classes that they're taking at the high school level, they're not looking at working towards a diploma. They're working against skills. They might have more life skills. And then again, extended school year, ESY, is a criteria-based service, oftentimes for the summer. And I know that we're kind of opening up in Fairbanks. Kids are back in school if they want to be in school. IEP meetings are still being held virtually. And because although kids and staff may be in schools, having other outside people being in there is not happening. So we're still either doing it by Zoom or by the phone, any way that it can happen. And typically right now it's Zoom, but can be phone. We don't want to not have a meeting because a parent isn't comfortable Zooming, so they can do the calls.
So it can be overwhelming and intimidating for parents going into a meeting with a table of teachers and educators and professionals discussing what is appropriate for that child. We recommend bringing someone for support, whether it be a friend, a partner, relative, or a professional like me. It can also be hard listening to areas where your child struggles and possibly how far behind they might be. As a parent, you may shut down. So, having another person there to listen, take notes, offer ideas and suggestions can be helpful. Now, who can be part of the IEP team? Parents, that's the most important. A general education teacher, a special education teacher, like Terry talked about, a school district representative, whether it's the principal, vice principal, or a district school coordinator. You can have specialists such as the speech, language, the OT, PT, psychologists. The student, if applicable, sometimes the students like to attend. And once they turn 16, we ask that they do attend if possible. And then any parent support, like a relative, friend, Stone Soup group, anyone that can kind of be there to translate or take notes for you.
And I really think that's an important piece, Anna, is having that support, because there's nothing, in my mind, it's nothing more challenging than going into a meeting where you feel like you're the only one. So whether it's an IEP meeting or some other meeting, so having that support is also always encouraged if a parent is not feeling comfortable with the situation.
So the teams can be helpful and are those who are willing to be upfront with families. They can take the time to go over their rights, give them time throughout the meeting for their input and questions. And remember that communication is key for both the families and the professionals so that there's a positive team environment. And especially when there's troubling things that need to be talked about at the meeting. So the ideal team would respect the family's culture and background. It would respect the teacher's efforts and education. It uses person-first language instead of talking about how we have an autistic child. We have a child who has or experiences autism. All the team know about the disability and have resources available to them to meet and support that IEP. Have the family's priorities reflected in the IEP. What is important for those families? Is it academic? Is it social emotional? What is a priority and what is important for the family to be in that IEP?
So the next step is about the implementation. So oftentimes it's implemented right away, but if the parent is not there, then it's 10 days. We have 10 days before implementing what is written. So in the perfect world, you would receive a copy of the IEP before the meeting, and it's a draft because you have to be part of that team process for anything to be final. You should not have a school team group coming in to the IEP meeting saying that this is the way it's going to be. The paperwork that comes in is a draft, and then you are talking about what works, what doesn't work, and coming to consensus about what should be in there. So if you've had it beforehand, then you can have discussions at the meeting. But if not, you can say, you know what, I need to take this home and I need to be able to have some time to read it, ask some questions. Feel free always to ask the special ed teacher again if there are things that you're not for sure of. The school district cannot use a lack of personnel or resources, or that it may be a challenge, as an excuse to not to provide FAPE or providing it in the least restrictive environment. So all children are able to access their placements based on the information in the IEP. Right, so then annually, the IEP team gets together. So at least once that has to happen. and you determine whether or not the goals are working or if they need to be changed. The hope is always that the goals and objectives have been attained and you move forward. Sometimes that's not where it's at for the student, but there should be a look and a discussion about what the change should be every year. If you're seeing IEPs that are looking the same every year, you have the right to request that things be looked at differently. If the entire team is not there, we've talked about the makeup of the team. Let's say a gen ed teacher is not going to be able to make it. Only the parent can excuse that team member. So if there is more than one gen ed teacher, there doesn't need to be an excusal if one of them can't be there. There just has to be at least one there. And I really suggest and encourage you, if you have questions and you think there's a concern or that you have new information to share with the team, that you call an IEP meeting as a parent. So if there's some medical information that has been obtained since the last evaluation or the last IEP, definitely share that. Don't wait until the next IEP meeting to share it as soon as possible. So the reevaluation is required every 3 years. And sometimes there will be new assessments done to see where the child is functioning. And sometimes the team will say, no, we don't need to do new assessments for this evaluation. We just need to review records, and that's okay also. So each time there's a reevaluation, the information from either present or past assessments are looked at, school records, and then getting the teacher and parent input. So you want to know first. That's part of the fact that you are not going to get a consent for evaluation means that there's just going to be a review of records. So if you think that there should be further assessments done, again, talk to the team or talk to the special ed person to be able to have a team meeting to discuss what evaluations need to be done. At every meeting, anybody who's been at a meeting in our district, we've had a variety of colors for the procedural safeguards book. And so that lets you know as a parent, what are your rights if you disagree with what's going on. Hopefully, if there is a disagreement, you're able to talk to the school or have somebody to help support you when you're talking to the school to be able to remedy what the issues are. But if you feel like that can't happen or you are talking to the school and not getting the remedies that you would like, then this booklet will give you the outline of what you can do to be able to have your parental rights safeguarded and your child's rights safeguarded. And there are a variety of ways. We can have facilitated IEPs, mediation, and then due process. So it outlines all of those things. Again, my hope is always that parents feel comfortable enough to talk to the district to be able to work through whatever the issues are, but know that you have rights and that there are different avenues for you to be able to pursue those rights. So read those procedural safeguards. They may not be riveting, but they are good information for you to have. And if you have questions, if the school hasn't explained them well enough, you can definitely ask them, or you're always able to call the state, the Department of Ed.
And I would like to add that we are actually having a class specifically on the procedural safeguards and rights in April. So our parent learning hour in April will be specifically on the procedural safeguards. And Stone Soup Group actually puts out a booklet specifically for procedural safeguards and IEP building. So you can always request one of those from me at any time. Things to remember. Written consent is the ultimate. Written consent, especially with an IEP, is the ultimate thing that has to happen to get anything else done. So that's very, very important. Remember that this is a team, and it may be a team that follows you and follows your kiddo for a long time. So being able to get comfortable with each other and understand each other and where each other is coming from is very, very important. And what do we bring to an IEP meeting? So we want you to bring your knowledge, your experience, your goals, your dreams, and your kiddos' goals and dreams, knowledge that you may have about your child and what their disability looks like for that kiddo and how it impacts their daily life. What is important to you right now? What is important to you in the future? We ask that we can have your patience, respect, and a sense of humor, especially during the tense times. And whatever your asks are, what do you hope to get out of the meeting? And what do you hope to get for your child so that your child can be more successful?
So a team process should be a collaborative team process. So when you're going into a meeting, it can be really nerve-wracking. So before the meeting, creating your talking points, things that you're concerned about that you want to make sure are touched upon is important. And do your research. Make sure that the questions that you ask are important. You may also want to there's the paper trail notebook that Stone Soup Group has, and it helps you organize the information that you get regarding your questions, and then being able to, if you've got things that you're printing out that you've found online or something, you have a place to put them. Definitely consider bringing a friend. I know when my parents go to the doctor, I go with them to take notes, because when somebody's giving you information, it's hard to digest it all. So having somebody at a meeting like this is really important. And but just please make sure that you let the school know you're bringing somebody with you that may determine who else they have come to the meeting. And then ask clarifying questions. It's okay and you're expected to be able to do that. And then, bring any information that you have from your outside therapies. Sometimes people will bring their outside therapists, although, oftentimes they're busy and not able to do that. But getting that information to the team is helpful, and they would be considering that. And just feel as comfortable as you can during the team process, because you are an important part of that team. And being able to let the school team also ask questions is important, so that everybody is on the same page and has the same understanding.
Now, of course, there are going to be times of frustration. We're all human. We have bad days and good days. Like this morning, I woke up and I have no caffeine. So I'm doing this caffeine free. So I hope that it's been a good presentation. But it's important to remember that you are a team and you have a common interest. Your common interest is that kiddo. And you all want that kiddo to have a positive and successful outcome. So working together through that frustration is really important. Ask questions for clarification, such as the 5 W's. Who is doing something? What is happening in the class? How are things happening? Where are things happening? So using those 5 W's and that 1 H are really important. Negotiation works better than demands. Try and find that common ground. Remember that these are the people who will be working with your child, and you want the child to have a positive experience as well. So in times of frustration, just being able to meet with people and know each other and work through things is really important. So do you have any questions? We really appreciate you coming. We do have a last slide, and we will actually do a bunch of other resources like the video that we watched today and some other things. But if you have any other questions, or if you need anything at this point, if you'd like to request anything, please let us know. You can unmute yourself.
Anna, we have a question about a counselor or a therapist being a part of the IEP meeting from Tim. And yes, they definitely can. The parent can bring anybody that they want to the meeting. If the school is inviting them, the school would have to get a release of information from the parent to be able to do the invitation. So typically parents do the invitation and then let the school know that they're bringing them. Good question.
Okay. Well, we're grateful and we're happy to be here as instructors for you. Next month, we'll be talking about transitions and transition services. Then in April, we'll be talking about the procedural safeguards and going a little bit more deeper into those. And then in May, we're going to be talking about some of those related services. So OT, PT, speech, and some of those. Do you have a better idea of the differences between private and school-based? I can't wait to see you guys next week. And I know that this was a lot of information. I will be sending out an email with the PDF of the slides. So you do have those for reference as well as the resources.
Thank you all and enjoy. I don't know if it's sunny down in Anchorage, but it's sunny here in Fairbanks. So we are going to be enjoying a nice day and it's going to warm up above 0. So it's even better.
There we go.
Sunny and cold. Yes.
Yep. Take care, everyone, and we will see you soon.